It's been 2 weeks since I announced my dating simulator game Love MO1, and already there are a lot of improvements implemented. Last devlog, I discussed the scope creep of the game from its initial conception to the actual project. What was originally a small pixel art game with about 7 girls to romance turned into a high-resolution game with 12 girls, each girl being a significant amount of work to implement with art, music, and writing. The number of characters was arrived at because of the way they are integrated into the game's systems. In Love MO1, the player encounters girls based on their college courses and clubs, and there needs to be a girl for every option. Despite this scope creep, I made the decision to add a 13th girl to the mix, Olivia. This girl isn't associated with any of the courses or clubs in the game, and behaves differently from the other characters. But why add another character? Well, this new character was created as a solution to some of the problems with the game. The first problem Olivia solves is about difficulty. Love MO1 takes place over 2 years of community college, and at the end of the 2 years, the player can confess their love for one of the romanceable girls. If the girl accepts the confession is based on the player's stats and some other variables, and this is what determines the win condition of the game. As a casual game, I didn't want any of the main girls to be too difficult to meet the win conditions for. Especially because one playthrough is about 2 hours long, it would feel bad for the player to spend all that time in the game just to lose in the end and have to start all over if they wanted to see a good ending. I could make some girls harder to win over than others, but there isn't a good way of communicating that to the player, and that would disincentivize players from simply choosing the girl they like the best and playing for them. Additionally, I think the nature of the game is suited to intrinsic rather than extrinsic motivation, which is something I strive for in my games. The solution was to add Olivia into the game to act as an implicit hard mode if the player chooses to pursue her. This way, a challenge is there if the player wants it, but it isn't the main focus of the game. Olivia is more difficult not just because of her higher stat requirements, but also because her stat requirements are evenly distributed amongst the stats. This means that the player has to choose how they spend their time wisely to evenly grow their stats, which is difficult because they can only choose one activity at the beginning of the week, which gets automatically chosen for the rest of the week. Also, with only one club active at a time, either the athletic stat or the charm stat doesn't have an easy way of growing along with the other stats. With a character like Grace, who is associated with the music class, the player can grind the art stat repeatedly to help win her over, but this can't be done with Olivia. Another problem Olivia solves is with the story. The player starts the game knowing none of the romanceable girls, and meets them over the course of the playthrough. Because of this, there are limitations on how I have to structure the writing. I can't have a scene involving multiple girls interacting with each other, because at any given point in the game, the player may only know some of the characters in the scene. The player has to meet girls based on their stats. This also makes it hard to craft an overall narrative to tie together the various girls' stories. But this problem is solved by Olivia, who is known at the start of the game and can act as a constant in the story structure. I added an introduction and tutorial section of the game centered around her. The game starts off at high school graduation, where the player confesses his or her love for their longtime friend Olivia, who promptly rejects them. The player is so crushed that their stats fall to 0 and their stress skyrockets, and they will have to spend the first summer of the game resting off their stats and slowly unlocking the gameplay features. The player will have one last chance to confess to her again at the end of the game. The last problem is that in the previous version of the game, there was no incentive to date all of the girls. The player could choose to focus all of their attention on one girl, and because only one girl can be chosen in the end, this makes the game too easy and made dating the other girls unnecessary. I solved this by borrowing a mechanic from the game Tokimeki Memorial. In that game, when a player neglects a girl for too long, the girl will spread rumors around with the other girls, causing multiple girls to lose affection for the player. This forces the player to date all of the girls and experience the full breadth of content, even if they know they only want one of the girls. So in addition to the affection value that each girl has, I added a neediness value. This value goes up when the player interacts with the girl, but goes down slowly every day until it reaches 0 and the gossip is triggered. This way, the player must date all of the met girls while focusing their attention on the one they wish to confess to. Olivia can't be asked out on regular dates, so when the player calls her, instead, she provides a report on the affection and neediness of the other girls. The player has to spend a time slot to get this information, which is valuable for finding out which girl has low neediness and reacting before it reaches 0. Since last time, I implemented the saving and loading feature of the game. I accomplished this using JSON. I have a save file class with a constructor for all the necessary save data that gets called by the game manager when saving. The save class is then converted into a JSON file and saved in the game's data path. When loading up the game, the save file is unpacked and the game manager reassigns all of the saved values. This has been immensely important for developing the game. Until now, I have been solely focused on the core game loop, but now that I can save progress in the game, I can work on the late game content and event content. There are now special events and holidays sprinkled throughout the game that add variety to the game and break out of the core game loop. The player can go to a Halloween party and see the girls' Halloween costumes, go to Thanksgiving at Olivia's house, play Secret Santa with a randomized girl, and possibly get a kiss on New Year's Eve watching the ball drop. In the previous build of the game, only one story event could occur per day. This is how I originally conceptualized the game, but this inevitably caused problems with the various random encounters which get checked for each day. Previously, the code I made had most of the logic operating based on events that get called by the management class, like the time manager, which has an on-date change event. This meant that the logic for determining story events only got called at the beginning of the day and couldn't get called later on to stack story events. I fixed this with a structural change that converted a lot of the event logic into a state machine in the game manager. The possible game states are now stored in an enumerator, and the game manager utilizes switch statements in the change stat method to determine the next state of the game and run logic for this state. With this setup, the story event state can be called multiple times in a row to stack multiple story events per day. This change also made it easier to fix a problem where the buttons on the gameplay dashboard would reappear on days when the gameplay choice is supposed to be automated. I've slowly been working on the art for the game, and since last devlog, I have created a bar scene, a park scene, and a beach scene, all as date locations. I am also introducing new background locations for the holiday events, which means that yet again the scope of the game is increasing past what I initially expected. Speaking of scope creep, there are now 4 main gameplay songs instead of one for each season. This makes the core part of the game feel less repetitive. Lastly, added the ability to poke the girls. This doesn't do anything, but it's fun. Subscribe for more updates, like the video if you enjoyed it, and follow my X for Screenshot Saturday posts. This has been Ryan9, thank you for watching.